Justin Wilcox fired at Cal. The ramifications for Oregon? Feels like they're going to come up eventually.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. It is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, the number one sports podcast network out there. Thank you all so much for making that possible. Offensive thoughts, individual standouts, and thoughts on the Big Ten title game as we head through rivalry week. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the FanDuel app today. So, I'm recording the show before Oregon plays Auburn in basketball. Hopefully, I've got a good outcome on the reaction show, which you've already listened or watched to by the time you're watching this. But what we don't know is to what extent, if at all, Oregon will be impacted by Justin Wilcox getting fired at Cal. So, Tosh Lupoi is rumored to be a top candidate. He has coached there in the past. He is an alum, and there's plenty of appeal. I think between the two Oregon primary assistants that could be a head coach, it's not unheard of for position coaches to get hired to be a head coach elsewhere. You know, Ken Wilson was once on Oregon's staff, went to be the head coach at Nevada. It didn't work out very well, but it's happened before. You know, Jamarcus Shepard is a candidate for the Oregon State job, but when the reports came out immediately that Tosh Lupoi is one of the top targets for Cal, made a lot of sense. So over the years, when I've discussed this possibility here on the show, what I've come back to is both what I have seen and what I've been told, and that's that Tosh's desire to be a head coach just isn't the same as everybody else. And I think there's a Mario Cristobal parallel here. Mario wasn't going to leave Oregon for any job except Miami. Closer to home, with his mother who was getting older, and it's his alma mater. Now, Tosh has that same connection here. And he's been kind of loosely mentioned for some other jobs out there in this coaching carousel, which is as busy as I can ever remember. I mean, as I'm recording this show, LSU is open. I think that's going to be Lane Kiffin. Florida is open. Penn State is still open. James Franklin's been hired to Virginia Tech. Now you've got 3 jobs on the West Coast that are open. Oregon State, Cal, and UCLA. And so when I heard that Tosh's name was out there, I thought maybe this is the one. Maybe Tosh wouldn't go be the head coach at Oklahoma State. Whereas if Will Stein got that offer, yeah, I could see it. But maybe he wouldn't try to be the head coach at Baylor if Dave Aranda got fired, or if, you know, in the next couple of years, Colorado moved on from Deion Sanders. Would Tosh go there? No, I don't get the sense. Maybe this is the one job that he would stop being Oregon's defensive coordinator for. And for this particular season, I think his profile has gained more stock. I think Will Stein's started higher entering this year. And both have been tied to a number of these openings before. None as seriously, I should say, as Tosh to Cal. But I think his stock at the moment is probably a little bit hotter because Will Stein's name in these conversations is a little bit more established. Now, as I'm going to talk about on the second segment of today's show, Will Stein just had one of his best coaching days probably ever since he's been Oregon's OC now in his 3rd season. But I totally buy that Tosh Lupoi would be a candidate, and there is a world where going into 2026, Oregon has 2 different coordinators than they have right now. And this job coming open raises the likelihood that at least one of them isn't going to be on staff next year. Now, a couple of immediate thoughts. I'm not doing a full dive until there's actually an opening on who Oregon should go after as defensive coordinator, but I think an immediate thought for an Oregon alum who was once offered, whether it was, you know, a legit offer or not, I know the offer took place, to Justin Wilcox, the Cal head coach. Would you bring him back as a defense coordinator? So this is just a 30,000 foot view of Justin Wilcox as a DC, which he hasn't been in a very long time. And my understanding is since he's been at Cal, he's not been a defensive play caller. Doesn't mean he couldn't be good at it again, but Wilcox, when he was at USC from 2014 to 2015, he's got a lot of ties to the West Coast. He's been at Washington, USC, he's a graduate of Oregon, of course, the head coach at Cal for a long time. And by the way, if you didn't know, his job security was fine until he lost by 21 points to Stanford. They got outscored 17-0 in the second half. So I would love to see Andrew Luck bring Stanford back just from a nostalgic standpoint. But 2014-15 at USC, Wilcox's defenses averaged 25 points a game and 25.7 points per game. Then he went to Wisconsin to be the defensive coordinator, and things improved. They care about defense more at Wisconsin than they have historically at USC since the turn of the 2010s and Pete Carroll left. He went there, and those defenses in the Big Ten averaged 15.6 points per game allowed. Then he got hired to Cal in 2017 as a result. Now, if Tosh were to become Cal's head coach, I don't think Justin Wilcox would get hired. He wouldn't be off my list. Just like if Will Stein gets hired to be a head coach somewhere, Chip Kelly's on the list. He's not the top of the list. It's not like when they go get Yen in Ocean's 11. You know, who else is on the list? He is the list. That's an especially appropriate callback as I'm recording the show from a hotel room in Las Vegas. But there's no he is the list. But if Tosh gets hired to be Cal's defense coordinator, I think Chris Hampton would get promoted to be the full-time defensive coordinator and play caller. That'd be my guess. His track record at Tulane came in year one. There were some things to correct. They allowed 34 points a game. You also have to consider that at Tulane at the time, they were trying to build things up under Willie Fritz, and they have factored into those stats a couple of games against opponents that they have significantly worse players than. The next year, that dropped all the way down to 22 points per game. Those were his 2 seasons as the DC. He's been the co-DC for the last couple of years, but Tosh has been the play caller. So if that winds up happening, I think it's far more likely Hampton would just become Oregon's full-time DC. I've talked about him before on the show. Guy that seems like he's on a trajectory and has been mentioned before. I can't confirm whether or not he's interviewed, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if he has for Power 4 jobs. Guy has proven the recruiting chops, and he's been a play caller before. Yeah, pretty solid resume there. If Tosh gets hired, I think they would just slide Hampton into the defensive coordinator role. That's my guess, and I don't think it'd be Wilcox. Now, the other angle that I'm sure will come up for a lot of Oregon fans when pondering this job is what happens with JKS. Now, I talk about him over on today's episode of Locked On College Football because I think that's the biggest domino. Yes, of course, who gets hired to Cal and what can... There are a lot of questions about Bay Area football programs at the moment. What I don't have any questions about really is how good can Jaren Kiawe-Sangapolotele be? That dude's a stud. As a true freshman, he has looked ready to go. And this is, I know, an especially painful week to bring up the comparison, but I can't help but watch him and see a lot of Michael Penix. It's just how good he's been, and he happens to be left-handed. So I don't expect at all Oregon to be in the JKS sweepstakes. I know that Cal has been working to make sure they have a good enough offer that is competitive with what you'd expect. Oh, well, Miami could go in and offer this amount of money, and maybe Miami's just more appealing because they've been a better program in the same conference as Cal is in now, which is just a wild thing to say. Cal is going to do everything they can, and I think they're more capable than people realize to make sure they make a competitive offer. Now, maybe another school would offer even more, but if the money is there, I've been told he likes it in Berkeley and wants to stay there, but there are going to be a lot of offers. I don't think Oregon will be among them. I think Oregon's number one plan in 2026 at quarterback is Dante Moore coming back, and I think it's more likely than not that happens, unless Oregon goes and wins the national championship. And if Dante Moore were to win that and then come back to Oregon, man, legendary status would be an understatement. But that's all, as we know, a ways away. And Washington's the only game that matters right now. But I think that if Oregon winds up not getting Dante Moore back off a non-national championship run, presuming they get into the college football playoff, which they control their own destiny to do, then I don't think JKS is a super likely option. Just my read on the situation. So if you have any other thoughts or comments about all of that stuff, let me know in the YouTube comments below. Oregon State is finalizing their job search. Tosh has been loosely tied. Will Stein's been loosely tied. Don't think either one's going to be taking that job. I think that Wilcox could be a late wrinkle for the Oregon State job, but I don't think that I don't think either Oregon assistant is going to be coaching in Corvallis next year. So let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments below. Hit me up on Twitter. All of that good stuff. How impressive was that Will Stein offense on Saturday? I will tell you. First, this episode brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And as you look at the Washington game, it's Oregon minus 6.5 in Seattle. If that makes you a little nervous because it's not a huge number, I think that is entirely justified. Washington, as you'll hear this week, is a good team. They've got some real playmakers, and it's on the road in a rivalry game. They would love nothing more than to potentially knock Oregon out of the college football playoff. So if you think Oregon's going to win a tight one, maybe like Washington in the points. Hedge your happiness, as it were. But if you think Oregon's dominating the Huskies as they did last season, 49-21 final, Oregon minus 6.5 is probably what you're looking for there. Right now, FanDuel's giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Let's relive that USC game a little bit more. I can't screw the bottle cap onto that water bottle there. Just road podcasting problems, you know? Oregon's offense against USC was phenomenally good. And as I talked about in the third segment of yesterday's show, you can go back and listen if you missed it. I'm not going to go into super deep detail here. There were a handful of offensive moments and sequences that I didn't think were good. And in the moment, during the game, had me going, man, what is Oregon doing? Why is Will Stein doing this and that? End of the day, Oregon had no business putting up 42 points with the litany of injuries in this game. And you got to credit the entire staff for the way they have recruited, for the way they have had guys prepared for their opportunities, and the way that they capitalize. But what Oregon has done in the last couple of games, they haven't had Evan Stewart all year, haven't had DeCorian Moore for the last couple, have not had, it's 3 straight games without DeCorian Moore, have not had Gary Bryant Jr. since the early portion of the Iowa game. When you combine that with the slew of injuries up front, once you're at that point, not that Oregon's backups aren't good enough to be starters elsewhere, just ask UCLA whether or not that's the case. But once you are down that many guys, your coaching and game plan and play calling has to be darn near perfect. So a couple of things that Oregon did really well in this game that stood out. Number one, they did stick with the run, whereas against Indiana, when the passing game wasn't there and they were confusing Dante Moore with their defensive looks, they did not run the ball as much as they should have. Now, at times, did it feel like they relied on the run too little in this game against USC? Yes. Overall, they still ran it well. And as I'm shouting out Will Stein, I also want to shout out Alik Terry. Because, man, the growth of Charlie Pickard he did not have this game in him a year ago. But he stuck it out. He's still the backup center. I think that's in part because of the injury to Bryce Bolton, who I think they're bringing along at center. And his ability to have stepped in and played as well as he did, I thought his run blocking grade was criminally low per Pro Football Focus. I don't even want to say what it is because it was so off the mark from what I saw with my own eyes. His pass blocking grade, however, for this game was 85. He graded it an 85. It was just over 85. which is astonishingly good. So for Will Stein to have adapted to those circumstances, and Oregon still wasn't going backwards and was consistently going forwards, but there were deep shots in this game. They took them to Benson. They, of course, took a couple to Kenyon Sadiq, the long touchdown. There were some gutsy calls in this game. But that last drive was really good from Will Stein. I mean, really, really good. They ran it, and then once he saw USC starting to creep up, starting to sell out for it, he just wrinkled in a little play action and got a guy wide open, easy pitch and catch, good read and execution to keep the first down, or to keep the drive going with a first down. It was the play action to Jamari Johnson, where I think Justice Lowe was running wide open on the back end. That might have been two different plays, but the bottom line is that the situational play calling for Will Stein in this game was good. Oregon was 7-12 on third down. That's really good. Really, really, really good. And the way that Oregon was able to overcome all of those losses, you can't look for all the times, and understandably so, that I've come on here and said in big games, Oregon staff, they just got out-coached. They got out-schemed. This was a classic example of Will Stein out-scheming Danton Lynn, USC's defensive coordinator, who is really good. I've been high on him for the last couple of years. He was with Chip his last year at UCLA, last 2 years at USC. He's good. And Will Stein ran circles around him all day. Took away three of his top receivers from the seat. Even if you take Evan Stewart out of that conversation, you take away two of his top receivers. You take away 2 to 3 offensive linemen at a time, including your NFL caliber left tackle and your NFL caliber center. And you still ran the ball well. One thing I have harped on with Stein that I think he's done a good job of is being creative in the run game. It's not just the Mario Cristobal, let's just run straight dive all the time. And let's just muscle up, overpower. Oregon wants to overpower you at times in the run game, but what they do a good job of is giving you different looks, having different running backs is a part of that. But the way that Stein utilized the personnel that they did have, and featuring Kenyon Sadiq, who's one touchdown away from an Oregon tight end touchdown record in a single season, I thought was just exceptional. And when you have that many guys out, that would have been a that would have been a valid excuse for the offense to not have a good day. And the offense had one of its best days ever in a big game, with your season basically on the line. So that the offensive game plan, execution, and situational play calling, not 100% perfect, rarely is. It was really, really good. So getting to my favorite segment of the week, individual standouts. There are 4 guys that a lot of players played well. Dante Moore, talked about him. Kenyon Sadiq led Oregon in receiving yards again. Man, when you put him anywhere, it's a mismatch. You put him in the slot, DBs aren't big enough. Put a linebacker on him. They're too slow. I don't know how Oregon keeps him around. He's just this good. And yes, I have 100% had the thoughts in the last couple of weeks. This was always in there. It was always possible. What were you waiting for? Go back to that Indiana game. Offense is struggling. Where is 18? Anyway. So there are 4 guys that are above everybody else. And this was such a complete team effort. Bryce Betcher had a great game. And Noah Whittington ran the ball well. Sadiq, a big day. Benson, huge moments. Dante Moore, really good. There are 4 guys that really turned this game in Oregon's favor. Let's start with the 2 offensive linemen who played the most. Fox Crater came in at left tackle. Isaiah World played less than 20 snaps in this game. Dante Moore wasn't sacked. I was worried about that when I saw Isaiah World pop up on the injury report, because I thought, oh no, if he's limited or if he doesn't play, their best edge rusher, Anthony Lucas, who I think would be a rotation guy, I don't think he'd start, but I think he'd kind of be in that Blake Purchase level of guys for Oregon's defensive line. That's their best edge rusher. And if he's going against a backup, oh boy, 0 sacks. is incredibly good work. He and Charlie Pickett's ability to come in and not just be serviceable, but to actively be good. One of the most overused phrases in sports, next man up mentality. That was put into real game situation, a real game situation on Saturday. And those two guys personified it. They have barely played this year. They've played no real meaningful snaps. It's been special teams or mop-up duty for both of them. And they just stepped in and absolutely crushed it. Cannot say enough good things about their performance. At the two most important offensive line positions, center and left tackle, we can debate which one's more important. There's no way anyone would rank those spots. Anything other than 1 and 2 is the most important spots on the O-line. You had two backups in the biggest game of the year. No sacks and 179 yards on the ground. Unbelievable stuff from those two guys. Phenomenally awesome. Now on the defensive side. Against Minnesota, I said Mateo Uyunglele played his best game of the year. That was only true for 7 days because then the USC game happened and Mateo had his best game of the season. He had the strip sack. He was all over the place helping in the run game. He also pressured the quarterback a lot. USC's offensive line was dinged up and they had no chance to block him consistently. He forced a high throw. Shout out Nasir Wyatt as well. That guy's a special pass rusher as a true freshman. And I think third and Oz is going to continue being a package that I want to see on the field. But for Mateo Uyunglele, who I've talked about plenty this year, and I don't think he's played to his potential, that's his full potential. Would love to see him do that again against a Washington offensive line that has improved from a year ago. But that was what I envisioned on an almost weekly basis when I talked about Mateo prior to this season. That was his most impactful game in the biggest spot. And then the matchup, one of the matchups I highlighted that went in Oregon's favor, Jaden Kennedy is just a certified dude. I almost feel like I have to go Drax talking to Star-Lord. You know, you are a dude. This is a man. Jaden Kennedy was playing like a man. Interception on 4th down. Mekhi Lemon has under 50 yards receiving. And one of his touchdowns, I don't remember who was matched up on him for the other one, but one of his touchdowns was when he got matched up with Jerry Mixon. That was a good schematic move by Lincoln Riley to put Mekhi Lemon on a linebacker. Like, just think about that with Oregon. Would you take Decorey Moore on a linebacker? Yes. I don't care who the linebacker is. Yes, 1,000 times. 7 catches, 34 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That's not what they want from Mekhi Lemon. You made, what was his name? Dakota Hines, I think is the guy. Tanook Hines. Tanook Hines beat you, and you know what? Guy made a couple of plays. Yep, one of them was a push-off, but he also made some other really good plays. But that was a matchup I talked about a lot. I think it was the first time I've put Jaden Kennedy's name in the title of one of my shows because it was that important, and he delivered in a big way. Absolute bona fide stud. Of all the players that have outperformed my preseason expectations, Jaden Kennedy is number 1 on the list. He's been so good. So good. And I can't wait to keep watching him play football for the Ducks because, man, Brandon Johnson was solid last year after coming over from Duke. He did a good job in the nickel spot. Jaden Kennedy's better. And he plays with that fiery passion and energy that it just gets you going as a fan. You watch, you're like, man, that guy loves playing football. Yeah, that guy's really good at playing football. And at Ole Miss, wasn't so good. Now at Oregon, dude's a stud. So, those guys needed a shout out. What about the Big Ten championship game? What do we want? All right, so wrapping today's show with a few thoughts on the Big Ten championship game in the playoff. So, and some Tuesday trivia because it is, in fact, the Tuesday show. Oregon can make the Big Ten championship game if Michigan beats Ohio State. And I will never, no matter how many points Ohio State is favored by. And don't get me wrong, I think Ohio State's going to win the game. I will never say, again, after last year, that can't happen. Because, man, rivalry games, that is not an exaggeration. It's not just a media platitude. It's not just a talking point. Nope, it's real. In rivalry games, it just gets weird. The best example is Gonzaga and St. Mary's in basketball. One of the best examples. That's a great rivalry between those two schools. St. Mary's can beat Gonzaga. They routinely split or even sometimes sweep the two regular season meetings. They've beaten them in the WCC tournament before. Like, it is a coin flip every time those teams take the floor. Gonzaga has been to a national championship game and another Final Four within the last 10 years. St. Mary's hasn't made the Sweet 16 since, I think, 2011. It's just the way that it is. And Oregon's got a great rivalry game this week. So if Michigan beats Ohio State, yep, there's a path. Generally speaking, after last year, do I want Oregon to have a first round bye? No. It's a long layoff, and there can be some benefits to that, which I'll get to in a moment. But playing another game and then having a long layoff, don't really want that. I'd like Oregon to have a home playoff game more than anything, because that environment at Austin, man, be nothing like it. Absolutely nothing like it. So I am pulling for Ohio State to beat Michigan. Make that simple. Oregon beats Washington, and the Ducks will have a home playoff game. That is a 99.99% guarantee. Now, a couple of you asked me questions about what happens if the Ducks lose to Washington here. In the scenarios I talked about going into these final couple of games where Oregon winds up at 10-2, this would be the better one from a playoff standpoint, not from an emotional standpoint. These are both rivalry games. I know fans want to beat Washington just as badly or probably more than they want to beat USC. That isn't completely and totally fair. I understand all of that. From the committee's standpoint, beating the number 15 team, who will still be ranked probably inside the top 20 by 15 points on Saturday, if you then stumble in a road game against Washington because of the USC win, that is better for Oregon's playoff hopes to get in at 10-2. So I think they get in, though I'm not 100% sure at all. At 10-2, I'd really like for Oregon to win the game because you never want to lose to Washington. And don't want all that to start coming up again for Dan Lanning. And you don't want to leave your fate to make the playoff up to the committee, because there could be a lot of teams at 10-2. And Washington was going to be one, and then they lost to Wisconsin because it started raining. So that's all I'm going to say about that for today. We'll see where Oregon winds up in the rankings on Tuesday night. One of my Locked On Ducks insiders out there says, "Hey Spencer, a few thoughts for the pod. First, I doubt Dan will allow it, but if Oregon plays that undisciplined this week coming on the road, they lose the game." That's probably true. Washington is no slouch at home, and even more so in their Super Bowl. Also true. Secondly, I think Poncho is by far and away the most important player to have healthy and back this week. A veteran guy who's the heart of the offensive line, and arguably the offense as a whole they'll absolutely need to have in a hostile environment like Washington. Thoughts? When I do my crossover with Roman, we're going to do 2 this week. One will be tomorrow's show. I'll be interested to see whether he feels more confident about Washington's interior or the edges of the defensive line. Because last year was just pure and utter domination in the trenches going both ways. Washington's gotten better. They're not all the way there, but they've gotten better. That would decide my answer. I mean, Fox Crater played great. There's absolutely a world where I'd rather have Isaiah World than Poncho if I can only have one. Really, I'd like to have both. Also, I feel good about the fact that the backups just played against USC, and I don't think USC or Washington is exactly a Michigan or Ohio State or even an Iowa type in the trenches, and they just played incredibly well. So on the first, I'll split these into a couple of SSAs. If they play that undisciplined, they lose the game. I think you could see a lot of points, and yes, it could cause them to lose the game. I don't think that if Oregon has, they had 130 penalty yards against USC. Yeah, that's got to come down without question. If they were to do that against Washington, they are still good enough to win the game. You do that against Ohio State, no. But Washington is not Ohio State, as we saw earlier this year. But yeah, we could absolutely look back and say, man, Oregon just committed too many penalties, and that led to them losing the game, because Washington is a good team, and the biggest thing that Washington can accomplish in 2025 is winning this game on Saturday. Because they lost that game to Wisconsin, they don't have any playoff hopes, no Big Ten championship. They're not a program that's going to care about going to a good bowl game or anything. Like, they're having a good season, and they would love nothing more as a fan base, as a locker room, coaching staff. This is their biggest game of the year now. That's what it comes down to. So, yeah, if you give them extra chances at home, crowd on top of you, yeah, that could be costly. But Joe's far and away the most important player. I'm gonna put that at a 5. I'm gonna put that one at a 5. But do I want to have Oregon starting center back in a road environment against Washington? Yeah, very, very much so. But Charlie Pickard gave me a lot of confidence after Saturday's game. He earned that. So, wrap with some Tuesday trivia here. Game day trivia question. While rare, multiple teams have been lucky to host game day more than once in a single season, as of course Oregon did this year. But only one team has hosted game day 3 times in a single season. Which team and in what year was game day hosted 3 times by the same team? Ooh. The same team. Can't be a Big 12 or ACC school. I don't think they would have gone to a Clemson or Florida State 3 times that I can remember. I'm thinking Big 10 SEC. I mean, for game day to go to a place more than once, you have to have a really big and powerful brand. So I'm thinking about like the Alabamas, the Ohio States of the world, Georgia maybe. Ooh, I'll throw this one out. Here's my guess. I'm going to go 2008 season, Florida. Urban Meyer, Florida. That's my guess. Hope I'm right. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.